there, welcome to Excel 2019. My name is Cindy and I'm going to be your instructor and help walk you through this series of videos. I want to take a few moments and let you know a little bit about myself and what to expect as you walk through this course. I've actually been teaching Excel for quite a number of years now, over 15, and I teach everything from the basics all the way to advanced features. So hopefully we'll be able to get a lot of this information over to you quickly so that you can get started working on some of your projects. If you're brand new to Excel, make sure you watch these in order. If you try to watch them out of order, it may not make much sense to you. And go ahead and watch them again and again if you need to. I want you to have the concepts down before you move on to the next video. If you've been using Excel for a while, hopefully you'll get some tips, tricks, easier ways to do things. Well, let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to go into section 2 and talk about what's new in Excel 2019. Hey there, welcome back. We are still in Module 1 where I'm giving you an overview or an intro to Excel. I want to go ahead in Section 2 here and just talk real quick about what's new in Excel 2019. There's some changes you'll want to be aware of, especially if you've worked in older versions. The basics always work the same, but let's jump right in and I'll show you some of the new features. Let's start with one of the newest features in Excel, and that has to do with selecting. Now, selecting has always been around, but there's a little twist to it now. Before, if we wanted to select a range, we would go ahead and do that. We'd hold Control and maybe get another range. We could click over here, we can click over here, wherever we want. But if we wanted to, for example, deselect this one, we'd have to click away from it and then start all over again. What they've done now is you have the ability to deselect some of the cells you've already selected without having to start over. So let's say again I just select this and I hold Control and come over here, and maybe I get this and maybe over here. And now I say I really don't want these selected. As long as I'm holding Control, I can click and drag through those and they are gone and the other cells are still selected. That's a really helpful little feature. The next feature I want to talk about is the new accessibility checker. For people who maybe can't see very well or disabled, sometimes they can't see when there are little things that might be wrong in their spreadsheet, and Excel will try to help them out by letting them know where some of those things are and what to do about them. Let me show you how the accessibility checker works. For those people that are disabled or possibly visually impaired, sometimes if there are weird things going on your screen, you may not be able to see it very well. Excel has this feature called the accessibility checker, which will help look for those things for you and then give you a real quick one-click way to go ahead and fix those things. One of the things that you'll see in a moment is if you look at this word months, this is actually in a combination of cells A and B. They've merged them together, and someone that's visually impaired may not notice that right away. Let's go ahead and look at the accessibility checker. You will find that under the Review tab, and then right here it says Check Accessibility. It'll pop up on the right hand side and it's found a couple of things. Let's click on the first one and you'll see it sees those merged cells we mentioned and it tells me which cells they're in. Now I could come over here and actually fix it, but notice that I can actually click the down arrow and then I can go ahead and unmerge it right from here. So that's one thing I can do. Now I would have to go back at this point and actually move it over here if I want it to look right. Now Excel also found something else. Notice it says default sheet names. It doesn't like the fact that sheet 1 is named sheet 1. For someone who's visually impaired, they might not be able to read that very well because it's small. We can go down and rename this, and I can do it right here, and I can call it My Sales Report. And that way it'd be much easier for someone to actually see what's on that particular sheet. And that's how the accessibility checker works. Another feature that's new to Excel 2019 is the Translate feature. The Translate feature enables you to take selected text and translate it to a different language. Whichever cell or range of cells I have selected, Excel will go ahead and translate it into another language for me. Let's say I'd like to know what the word months looks like in Spanish. As long as I have that cell selected, I can go to the Review tab Choose the Translate option, and you'll see the translator appear on the right. The very first time you do this, it will take a minute to load the translator, but then after that, it pops up just like this. Now here's the word months I have selected, and down here I can pick the language I'd like to see months translated into. So you can see that if I wanted Spanish, for example, I can choose it right there. You can also do it in reverse. If you happen to have Spanish text out here somewhere, see how I can flip this and it tells me this word is the Spanish word and this is the English word. And that's pretty cool when you want to work with translations and see what words look like in another language. Another new feature that Excel has is a new function called concat. We used to have one called concatenate, and that would actually merge two cells together in the same cell, and that is still there, but it's going away. So I want to show you how this works because it'll be the same with a couple of additional new features. We used to have a feature called concatenate, and what concatenate would do was take two cells, like maybe Sarah Kling here, and merge them together in the same cell. There are times when you want to do that. Keep in mind, if you're going to sort and filter, you do want to keep these in separate columns, but let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to right click on column D and insert a new column there so that we can put our merged cells in. Now I'm going to start with the equal sign because I am writing a formula. I'm going to put CON, and that brings up all the functions that have CON in them. Now here's the old one, concatenate, right here. You can see it has a yellow, what we call a yield sign. That means that that particular function is getting ready to go away soon. This new concat has actually replaced it. What I'm going to do is double click on concat to stick it in there. And the first thing it wants to know is what's the first piece of text I want to merge. That would be Sarah. I'm going to put my comma, and then it wants to know what the second piece of text is, and that would be Kling in this case. And that's all I want. I'll go ahead and hit the enter key, and there's Sarah Kling. It's merged those two pieces of information together. Now you'll notice there's no space in there. In order to get the space, I just double clicked so that we can edit our formula. You want to click after that comma and before the C, because you're going to add an open quote, a comma, a space, a close quote, and then a comma. That tells Excel there's another piece of data in there, and the space in there is what I'm looking for. I'll go ahead and hit the enter key, and now you can see it's got the space. I can copy this down and have all of these. Now let me go ahead and delete this. The concat function also has an additional thing that it will do. Let's say that you want to take all of these, for example, and merge those into one cell. All we'd have to do is come over here and start with our equal sign. We'll put our concat in again. And now what we'll do is select all of these and hit the enter key, and now you'll see that it's actually put those all in one cell. Now there's no way you can go back and put the spaces in unless you manually do it, but you'll see this goes on and on and on forever, especially if you had a long list like this. So that's what the concat feature will do for you. Those are just a few of the new features that are in Excel 2019. As we go through this series of videos, I'm going to point out some of the other new features and we'll see how to use those as well. Let's go ahead now and jump into section 3 where I can give you a course overview, and that way you know what to expect as you go through this course. Hey, this is Cindy. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be covering throughout this set of videos. We're going to start at the very beginning. I'm not going to assume you know anything. We're going to go over the screen itself, get you familiar with terminology, what are some of those pieces and parts, how those buttons work, and then we'll jump right in and start creating what we call an Excel workbook. Sometimes people will call these Excel sheets, and they're really not sheets because the sheets are actually in the workbook. The file itself is called the workbook. That's the terminology we're going to be using. We're going to go all the way through. I'm going to show you how to set up a workbook from scratch. We're going to talk about how to work with those different sheets. We'll go through all the formatting options. How do you print those borders? We're going to go all the way through and create some formulas as well. A formula is basically a mathematical calculation that you can have Excel do, and that's the beauty of working with any kind of spreadsheet or workbook, is being able to do those mathematical calculations. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. I'm going to go ahead and start by giving you an overview of the Excel window first so you'll know exactly what we're doing as we move forward. Let's move over into section 4. Welcome back. We are working in Module 1, and in this module we are getting an introduction to Excel. We're all the way down to section 4 now, where I want to give you an overview of the Excel window. It's going to be very helpful for you, especially when you get started, if you know where to look for things and some different terminology that we're going to use in a lot of these videos. Let's go ahead and flip over to Excel and I will show you how to get started. Let's go ahead and start at the top left of your screen and we'll work our way down. The first thing I want to point out is this whole line right here, which is what we call the Quick Access Toolbar. We're kind of getting away from the term toolbar, but you'll notice that we have one left here in Microsoft Excel, and it has a few of the common options that you're going to use on a regular basis. Get really familiar with the very first one, that left arrow. That is your undo. If you make a mistake, you're going to be able to undo that mistake. You have an arrow to the right of it, which if you click on it will give you a drop-down list of all the things you've done. If you wanted to click at any point on that list, you could undo everything from that point up at the same time. There's also a redo. That's the arrow that points to the right. Redo allows you to bring back one at a time those things that you have undone. A couple of other ones just to be aware of. This one is your Save button. If you happen to be working in this file and you just want to hit the Save button, you can do that at any point. Also, there's a quick print option right there, which will allow you to just print your file. You'll notice there's a down arrow to the right, and this lets you customize your Quick Access Toolbar because you may have some buttons here that I don't have and vice versa. You can see that if you click on one, it adds it here, or if you uncheck it, then it takes it away. One that I want you to add is the email button. If you happen to use Outlook for your email, you will love this little feature because what it allows you to do is go ahead and create a message right from here and attach this file. And we'll talk more about that in a later module. The next thing I want to point out is the fact that this whole bar all the way across is what we call your title bar. You'll notice that currently it says Book 1 and it lets me know I'm working in Excel. Book 1 is the name of a blank workbook. When you're working in Excel and you first turn it on or you click New, you're working in what we call a blank workbook. Sometimes people call Excel files worksheets. They're not worksheets, they're workbooks with sheets inside of them. You're going to see at the bottom of your screen a sheet 1, that's the actual worksheet. And by clicking the plus sign, I can add as many worksheets as I would like at the bottom. But the file itself is called a workbook. Once you decide to save this file, you will give it your own name and it'll be reflected right here in the title bar. Now over on the right, you do have your minimize, restore, and close that will let you make the window smaller, or if you wanted to close it, you'd be able to do that as well. The next thing I want to point out across the top are your tabs. You can see that you're currently on the Home tab because it looks white, but notice you can click any of these tabs to go ahead and see what's called the ribbon below it. When I click on Home, for example, this whole line across is called the ribbon. And on each ribbon you will find groups of buttons. This is called the clipboard grouping. Each group name is right here at the bottom. Most groups, not all, have a little arrow on the bottom right. You'll notice that each group has different options. You just click the buttons to get to the options, but what if there's an option here that falls under that group name and you don't see it here? That's when you click the arrow to get to those additional choices. You'll find that once you're in what we call a dialog box, you can go ahead and close it with the X at the top. If you click the File tab, that'll take you into what we call the Backstage View. We're going to look at this over in section 6, but I just wanted to show you that if you happen to click there, hit the left arrow and that'll take you back. Underneath your ribbon, you're going to see what we call the Work area. This is where you're going to actually type your text or your numbers or your formulas. You're going to see that your work area is divided into columns which go up and down. Your columns are labeled with a letter at the top. You have 16,384 columns available to use. That's quite a few columns, so you're not going to run out of space there. Now your rows that go across, notice they're labeled with a number over on the left like this. You've got 1,048,576 rows. You are really not going to run out of room, I promise. And that's all on this first sheet, sheet 1. If you add multiple sheets with this plus sign like I mentioned, each sheet will have the 16,384 columns, the 1,048,576 rows. The way each sheet is set up, you'll notice that the intersection of a column and a row is what we call a cell. And when you click there, that cell will have a green line around it. We call that your active cell. That's how you know which one you're going to be typing in. You'll notice that each cell here has a name. We refer to that name as a cell address. A cell's address will be the column you're clicked in and the row you're clicked in. For example, this one here would be C3, and you'll need to reference that when you start writing formulas, so get really familiar with that. You'll notice on the bottom right-hand corner of your active cell is a little box. We call that your fill handle. Your fill handle will do a couple of different things. It's going to let you copy whatever's in that cell, and it's also going to give you a list of some predefined items, and we'll go over some of these in a later section as well. Like I mentioned, each cell has a name. That name will be reflected right here in the name box. You can see when I click over here, this is D2, and it says D2 in this name box. And this name box does more than just tell you the name of the cell you're clicked in. You're going to see later that you can actually select groups of cells, which are called ranges, and give them names. The X will allow you to cancel your entry. The check mark will allow you to accept your entry, and then we're going to talk about functions later on in a later module, and that's where you're going to go when you want to start writing some of your formulas. Whatever's in your cell you're clicked on shows up in the formula bar up here. Your cells can hold three things. They can hold text, numbers, or formulas, and a formula is a mathematical calculation you write to get an answer. You're going to notice on the right hand side of your screen that you have a scroll bar so that if you need to scroll up and down you can. And you also have one at the very bottom of your screen in case you need to scroll left to right for some reason. You also have three buttons at the very bottom that are your views. And your views are just different ways to look at your file. You want to stay in your normal view most of the time, but you're also going to be using page layout from time to time. And you're also going to use what we call the page break preview from time to time. I'm going back to normal, and the last thing I want to point out is your zoom at the very bottom right. You can zoom in to make this a little bit larger or zoom back out to make it a little bit smaller, and that's just a view. That's all that is. Well, that's a quick overview of how the screen itself works. What I'd like to do now is take a few moments over in section 5 and talk to you a little bit about how the mouse works, because you're going to find that whatever the mouse looks like, it will do different things. Let's go ahead and move over to section 5. We're still in Module 1 and we're all the way down now to section 5. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the different features that the mouse has. It's going to be important in any program you work in to recognize the different ways the mouse changes what it looks like, but especially in Excel. Let's go ahead and flip over and I'll show you the 4 different ways your mouse will look in Excel. There are 4 different ways your mouse will look when you're working in Excel, and let's start with this one. When you see a white cross like you see here, you're going to use that when you're trying to select one or more cells. If I click in any cell, that's called selecting a cell. That means that's the active cell now, the one you'll actually be typing in. If I need to select multiple cells, I'm going to place that white cross right in the middle of that cell and drag straight down or across, and that's called selecting a range. We'll talk about ranges a little bit later, but ranges are basically a group of adjacent cells. If you click away from those, you will deselect your range. The next thing your mouse will look like is these black crosshairs that you see right here. Now I got that by pointing to the little box in the bottom right hand corner of that active cell. This is called the fill handle. The fill handle actually will do two different things in your computer. The first thing is there are some lists that are pre-built in Excel. Those lists are days of the week, months of the year. If I type any day of the week in this cell, let's say I put Friday in here, and I drag this down, you'll see it will continue the list for me. I can also go to the right or left, and it will do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. If you have something in a cell that's not part of one of those predefined lists, and this could be numbers, text, anything, it will actually copy whatever's in that cell. Let's say I put the number 32 in there and I drag straight down. Notice it just copies 32. The reason it doesn't count is it doesn't know in what sequence you want to count, and we will talk about how to make it do that a little bit later, but for now, just know that the fill handle will copy whatever's in that cell. This is going to be one of your best friends in Excel. There will be times when you write formulas that you'll want to copy that formula, and this will just do that for you. The next thing you'll notice is that if I point my mouse around the edges of my active cell, I get this white arrow with a little cross behind it. That's going to allow me to pick up whatever's in this cell. Let's say I had that 32 in there again. Notice I can just point around the edges and I can drag this information where I'd like it to be and just drop it off, and it will move that information to that new cell. Those are the different ways that your mouse will actually work in Excel. What I'd like you to do is pay particular attention as we go along to this, and you'll see that this will make life a lot easier for you in a lot of different situations. Let's go ahead now and move over to section 6, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how that Backstage View works. I will see you in just a few minutes. All right, we're still in Module 1, and I want to go ahead and wrap up this particular module with section 6 and talk to you a little bit about the Backstage View. The Backstage View is an area that you can go into where you've got a lot of different options, like if you wanted to save this file, or if you want to create a new one, or even if you wanted to go and change some of the options in Excel, you'd be able to do those things in the Backstage View. Let's flip over to Excel and I will show you how to get to the Backstage View and all the options. When you're looking at the tabs across the top, you'll notice the very first one says File. By clicking on File, that's going to take you into what we call the Backstage View. In the Backstage View, you'll notice it automatically defaults to the Open option. This is where you would go if you wanted to open an existing file. You will be able to look through these different places here or browse your computer for that particular file. You would see any workbooks you've already created here. You could actually double click and open one if you'd like, or you can look through the folders and find a file that way. Back up above Open is the New option. If you wanted to create a brand new workbook, you could come in here and choose the blank workbook, or you'd be able to look at some of the templates that are in Excel, and you'll see there are a lot of different calendars and budgets and different things like that. They're great ways to start, and that way you don't have to set the whole thing up from scratch. They're templates you can use by typing over the information there. You have some save options that we'll be talking about over in Module 3. You have the ability to print. You can actually share this file with some other people if you'd like. You can export this, you can publish this, or you can close this file. If you close the file, you're not closing Excel, just this particular file that you're working on. There's also some other options at the bottom, and I want you to notice the one that says Options, because that's where you're going to be able to go to change a lot of the options that are in Excel, and we'll be doing a lot of that in a later module. But right now, I just want you to know that if you click the File tab at the top, this throws you into what they call the Backstage View. To get out of it, just hit this arrow that points to the left, and you're back in your workbook. Well, that's going to wrap up Module 1, and that's giving you a quick lay of the land here. What I'd like to do is actually go ahead and get you started on creating some new workbooks. Let's go ahead and move over to Module 2, and we'll get started. Welcome to Module 2, and we're talking in Module 2 about how to create your workbooks specifically from scratch. I want to go ahead and in this particular section, which is section 1, talk to you about how to type in text and numbers and get the basic layout of your spreadsheet ready to go. And that way you'll know how to set something up from scratch. Let's go ahead and flip over to Excel and I will show you how to get started. One of the things that people often say to me is, I don't know how to actually get started with a new blank workbook, and it's really pretty simple. What you want to do is decide if you want column headings at the top. A column heading would just indicate what type of data is below that particular column. You can also have row headings. That means if you put something here, for example, it would tell you what's in the row across. You can have a combination of column headings and or row headings, or just one or the other. That's totally up to you. It doesn't really matter which row you start on. You do have some area above row 1. That's called your header area. So don't feel like you have to start down in row 3 so you have some extra space there. I'm just going to start on row 1. Your cells will actually hold 3 separate items. They will hold text, they will hold numbers, and they'll hold what we call formulas. And a formula is basically a mathematical calculation that tells Excel what to do to give you an answer. You can do super simple math, like if you want to add some numbers, or if you want to do some sophisticated analysis, things like that, you could do that as well. But let's start really easy and put in some column headings. I'd like my first column to say the word months, and because I'd now like to type in B1, I'm just going to hit the tab key on my keyboard, and you'll see tab always moves you to the right. Enter always moves you down. This column, I'm going to put in the word sales. Column C, I'll put in the word expenses, and in column D, I'll put in the word totals. You'll notice that after totals, I didn't hit any key on the keyboard. That's why you see my insertion point blinking there. And I want to show you that if you hit this little check mark, that's just another way to accept the entry. Let's say underneath the word months, I want to put some actual months of the year. I want to put January, February, and March, and we'll use the abbreviations. I'll just put in Jan. And if you remember back in Module 1, I talked to you a little bit about the fill handle. That's the little box on the bottom right-hand corner of your active cell. Remember, if you get the black crosshairs like this, that's called the fill handle, and you can hold your mouse and drag down until you want to stop. I want to stop when it says March out to the side, and you can see it's filled it in now. Let's say in A6, I want to put the word totals. You'll notice that when you type text in, the text lines up to the left side of each of the cells you've typed it in. That's where it lines up by default. You can change that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Right now, I want to put some numbers in underneath my sales and expenses. I'll say that January's sales were 150. Then I'll say that February is 175, and we'll just say it was 225 for March. I'm going to click over in C2 and put the expenses in. I'm going to say it was 125, 150, and we'll say 210 here for March. And you can see I just hit the enter key to go down in that particular case. You'll notice the numbers are considered generic. There's no $sign, no .00, none of that. You're going to have to tell Excel what your numbers actually represent. And we'll get to that, but for now, just know that these are the numbers we're putting in. Now let's say I've got the word totals here, and I have the word totals here. And what I really meant to do up here was put in the word profits. Now I could hit delete on my keyboard to get rid of that, but I really don't have to. I can type the word profits right over it, and when I enter, I've got new text. Just be really careful that you're typing in the cell you mean to, because you can type over your text accidentally. The next thing I'd like to do is go ahead and add up these sales. So why don't we go ahead and flip over to Module 2, and I will show you how to write some super basic formulas in Excel. Now that we know how to actually set up our spreadsheet from scratch, we've actually typed in some numbers and some text. I want to show you how to go ahead and create some super basic formulas. A formula is a mathematical calculation you use to actually add up numbers or any kind of math you want to do with the numbers you've got. Let me go ahead and flip over to Excel, and we're going to keep going with our spreadsheet, and we'll add up those sales and those expenses. A couple things just to know about formulas. Formulas can be on the same sheet as the data. In a few minutes, we'll add up our sales and just put the answer right down here. But you may have the data on this first sheet and want to put your answers over on another sheet. You can certainly do that. You can also put your formulas in a totally different file, and we'll be doing some of that a little bit later as we go along. So formulas can be on the same sheet as the data, on a separate sheet or in a separate file. The thing to remember is wherever you click the mouse, that's where your formula is going to show up. If I click right here, that's where it's going to be. If I click over here, that's where it's going to be. There are a couple of keys on the keyboard that you'll want to be aware of before we start working, because these are going to help you when you're writing your formulas. I'm going to go ahead and pop up a picture of my keyboard so you can see it, and I'll point to some of the keys for you. First of all, if you have a numeric keypad on the right like you see here, you're going to see this plus sign, which is for addition. The minus sign here is for subtraction. You've got this little star, which is your multiplication, and this slash is division, so they're all right together. If you don't have your numeric keypad on the right, you can find these same buttons right up here. Here's your plus, you've got your subtraction, your multiplication, and then you're going to see your division is right down here. You also need to be aware of these open and close parentheses above the 9 and the 0. We'll be using those, and we're also going to be using the caret symbol, which is above your 6 right here. So just be aware of those when you're working, because you're going to be using those to actually do the math. The other thing is, you'll notice there's an equal sign right here. All formulas must start with an equal sign, no exceptions. If you don't have the equal sign, it will not do the math for you. Alright, let's go ahead and write some formulas. I'm going to leave that up for a few minutes, and I'm going to click over here in B6. I'd like to add my sales, and I want the answer to be in B6. That's why I'm going to start there. Remember, I told you that all formulas start with an equal sign. You must type that in. Now what we're going to do is basically add the cells that we'd like to actually have Excel add for us. Now I could type in 150 plus 175 plus 225, and I would get the right answer. The problem is that if I change the numbers in these cells, the answer won't update. Instead of actually typing the numbers, you're going to use the cell addresses. The first one, the 150, is in B3. Notice I can type it, but I'm just going to click here, and that way it inserts it in the cell for me. Now I'm going to type my plus sign because I have another one that I'd like to add to this. I'm going to click in B3, and then I'm going to hit plus again, and then I'll click in B4. And that's all I have that I'm going to be adding. If you happen to have a plus sign at the end like this, then you're going to get an error message. I'm going to hit the enter key because I'm finished with this formula. And here's the little error message I just mentioned. It basically says there was a typo. I had that plus sign at the end, and it thinks this would be the formula I do want. It is, so I'll just say yes. And you'll notice now that it has moved me down to the cell below where I was, and I have my answer back up in B6. Now I'm going to click back in B6, and let's go look at this formula. I'm just going to double click in it to get back into it, and you can see it took out that plus sign at the end for me. If you've written formulas a little differently, then that's okay. Just kind of bear with us because we're building from the ground up, so you'll know why you do what you do. Think about this too. If you've got 1,000 numbers you want to add, do you want to go plus B2 plus B3 all the way to 1,000? Probably not. So we'll learn some other ways to write formulas using what we call functions or words that tell it what to do. For now, I'm going to hit the enter key so that I have my answer there. I can do the same thing over in column C. I'll just start with the equal sign. I'll click in C2, hit the plus sign on my keyboard, C3, hit the plus sign on my keyboard, and then C4. And once I'm finished, I'm going to hit the enter key, and you can see I've got the answer of 485. Something I want you to be aware of. 485 is not what's in that cell. That's the result. The formula that you see right up here is what's actually in the cell. Same thing over here. You can see there's a formula in that particular cell. Let's say that I wanted to figure out my profits over here for January. Basically, to do that, I'm going to take my sales minus my expenses. All formulas have to start with an equal sign. I'm going to click on my sales for January and subtract my expenses and just hit the enter key, and you can see that the answer is 25. I can go down the list and do the same thing with each one of these. I can take my February sales minus my expenses. I can hit the enter key and I have 25, and then I'll do one more. We'll say in this case that we take our sales for March and subtract our expenses for March, and in this case we get 15. And if I wanted to figure out the answer down here, I can write the formula the same way I wrote it there. I'll go ahead and put my equal sign in. I'll add D2 plus D3 plus D4, and then I'll go ahead and hit the enter key, and I have 65. That's going to be a quick way to go ahead and write some super basic formulas here so that you can add and subtract some really basic numbers. We're going to go ahead and go now over into section 3, and I want to talk to you a little bit in section 3 about what we call relative references. Hey, welcome back. We're in module 2, and this is section 3, relative references. We just got through creating some super basic formulas, and one of the things I want to show you is that the formulas are the exact same when you look at the columns across, and they're the exact same when you look at the rows down. And I want to give you an idea of what a relative reference is and how you would make use of that when you're writing your formulas. Let's go ahead and take out the profits for February and March real quick. And I want to take out the totals for columns C and D as well. We'll put them back in. Now let's go ahead and look at our cell B6 and examine that formula. I'm going to double click in the middle of it so we can see it again. And if you notice, we're adding B2, B3, and B4. Now we don't have a total here in column C. I can type it. We've already figured out we can write it by hand. But I'd like to use the fill handle to copy this. Remember that the fill handle's on the bottom right hand corner of the active cell, and one of the things it will do is copy whatever's in the cell. And we've already determined that a formula is there, not 550. I'm going to drag all the way across to column D, and you'll see there it just gives me all of my totals. I could drag this as far as I needed to all the way across. It's a quick way, if you already have the first formula in, to go ahead and copy that formula to the other columns across. I can do the same thing up here if I want to go up and down. I can drag the fill handle and go down to row 4 in this case, and now I've got my answers filled in. Now let's talk about relative reference. Remember in this one, the formula was B2 plus B3 plus B4. If I go to column C, the formula is C2, C3, C4, and the same thing over with column D. What is the only difference in these three formulas? The column. That's it. Excel knows that when you copy a formula across like we did using the fill handle, to go ahead and change the column so that the answer is correct. If we look at the rows up here, let's look at D2 real quick. That formula said B2 minus C2. Well, the one below it's the exact same, it's just the row is different. See how it references row 3? And the one below it would reference row 4. Again, that's the relative reference. There will be times when you don't want Excel to do that, and we'll learn later how to create what's called an absolute reference. So just keep in mind that the relative reference is when the Excel changes the column or row to make sure the formula is correct so you get the correct answers. Let's go ahead and move over into section 4, and I'm going to talk to you real quick about the order of operations. Hi, welcome back. We're in Module 2 and we are now down to Section 4 where I wanted to talk to you about the order of operations in math. And if you think back to middle school, maybe around 6th grade or so, our teacher taught us the order of operations in math, but most of us don't remember it. And now that we have to use it, well, we're going to have to relearn it. So let's go ahead and flip over to Excel and I'll show you what the order of operations actually is. Math of any kind will always follow the order of operations. Excel will look through your formula, and if it sees anything in parentheses like you see here, it will do what's in parentheses first. There's no exceptions to that. Then it will look for any exponents, and that would be if you had 4 to the 2nd power, for example. Then it will look for any multiplication or division, and then addition or subtraction. I want to go ahead and give you a good example of why you need to write your formulas keeping this in mind, because if you don't write them correctly, your answers will be wrong and you won't even know it. I want to come over here to cell A8, and I'm going to go ahead and put in here April projections. What I'd like to do is predict what my April sales are going to be and also what my April expenses are going to be. There are a lot of ways to do this, but let's say that we want to take our first month and our last month and just divide by 2. That's all we want to do. I'm going to go ahead and put my equal sign in here. I'm going to have it add my first month plus my last month, which in this case happens to be B2 plus B4. And then whatever that answer is, I want to divide it by 2. And that's all I want to do. I'm going to hit the enter key and see what we get. Now if you notice, we got 262.5, and we can look at this very easily and tell that answer is not correct. But if you're working with a long list of numbers, it's not always that easy to eyeball it. Let's go ahead and examine what Excel did, and we'll see why we got that incorrect answer. I'm going to double click and open the formula back up. My first question is, do you see any parentheses in this formula? No. Do you see any exponents? No. Do you see any multiplication? No. Do you see any division? Yes. The first thing Excel did was this part right here. It took B4, which is 225, and divided it by 2. The only thing left to do was add B2. I didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do was add B2 and B4 together to get an answer and divide that answer by 2. So if you notice, what I've done is just enclose that B2 plus B4 in parentheses so that we do that first. And now if I enter, notice I get a totally different answer. When I go back and look at this now, if I said, are there any parentheses? You can see there are, and it's going to add my first and last month together, get an answer, and divide it by 2. Let me go ahead and just do the expenses again just to show you one more time. I'm going to start with equals. I know that I want to add my first month and my last month together first, so I'll go ahead and close that in parentheses, and then I'm going to divide the whole thing by 2. And you can see in this case it's 167.5. Now I could practice one more, but I'm going to go ahead and use the fill handle and copy that across, and now you can see I have all of my answers. That gives you a quick overview of the order of operations in math. Remember, that's probably the most important thing about formulas. Always think about, is it going to automatically do what I want first? If not, enclose it in parentheses. And by the way, if you see a formula that has multiple sets of parentheses, it's always going to work from left to right. It'll add whatever's in the first set, then it'll do whatever's in the second set all the way across. You can also have parentheses inside of parentheses, which would look something like this. That's called nested functions. When you have something like that, it's going to do the inner ones first and then go back and do the outer ones all the way across. And you can have up to 10 levels of those. We'll see some of those as we move along as well. But that's your order of operations. Now that you know what that is, let's go ahead and finish up Module 2 and move over to Section 5, where I'm going to talk to you about working with ranges. We've made it all the way down to the end of Module 2 now. This has been the module about creating workbooks. This is Section 5, and I want to talk to you in this particular section about working with ranges. You're going to do a lot of different things with ranges. And a range is basically a group of adjacent cells that you might want to change the color in. It could be that you want to make them all dollars. It could be that you want to use ranges in your formulas. Let me go ahead and flip over to Excel, and I'm going to show you how ranges work. Let me show you what a range looks like if you had it selected. This right here would be a range. It is a group of adjacent cells. You can do a lot of different things with a range. It could be that all of the numbers I have selected here, I'd like to maybe make these dollars, for example. It could be I'd like to center them. It could be I want to cut and move them somewhere else. There's a zillion different things you can do with a range. You'll notice that if you have a range and you hit the Enter key, you stay in the range. The white cell is just your active cell. You can also use the Tab key to go to the right instead of going up and down. What you want to avoid if you're trying to work with a range is don't use the arrow keys on your keyboard, because notice it deselects the range, or if you just happen to click your mouse somewhere, that would deselect your range as well. Let me show you how to select a range. You're going to find the starting cell, put your mouse right in the middle of it. You want to make sure you have that white cross, and hold your mouse down and click and drag. Just make sure you let up at the ending cell. Now sometimes when you do that, especially if you have a lot of cells you're trying to select, you might be holding the mouse down and accidentally go way down the page or way up the page, and it may not get you exactly what you want. So here's another way to select a range. Click in the cell you'd like to start with, hold the Shift key on your keyboard, and click inside the cell you'd like to end with. That's a good way to always get exactly what you want. Now when you start writing formulas, you're going to have to use these ranges. If you saw this one written as an example, this would be cell B2 through C4. So it would look like this. It would say B2, colon, and then C4. That's the range you would be working with in this particular case. You'd be maybe adding these up, for example. Let me go back and select that same range real quick. What if I asked you to quickly tell me what these numbers add up to be? You might be able to quickly add this in your head, but here's what I want to show you. When you start working with formulas and using ranges in formulas, you're going to have a word in front of this B2 colon C4 to tell it what to do, because right now it knows the range, but it doesn't know what to do with the range. If you have a range selected, and remember that can even be two cells as long as they're adjacent to each other. If you look down the bottom of your screen, it tells me the sum equals 1035. I don't know if you can see that down there or not. But that's an example of a function or a word that we're going to use in our formulas later to tell it what to do. If I wanted to right click on this word sum here, you're going to see there are 6 what they consider to be the most common, and I could click on any of these to turn them on or off. So if I frequently wanted to see any of them, I could have them show up down here at the bottom just as a quick look. Now notice if I deselect, you don't see that down there at all. Well, that's going to go ahead and wrap up our section on working with ranges. Let's go ahead now and move over into Module 3 because we need to talk about saving this work. We've done a lot to it and I'd hate to lose it. So let's go ahead and go over to Module 3 and talk about saving.